I'm going to speak a little bit today about surprising heritage in sort of in outer space, and how basically I got to this topic. So a little bit of context. As it so happens, the Open University has a lot of collaborations with BBC and with and producers of programs. And one of the things that they asked is for some academics to consult on a new upcoming program called Once Upon a Time in Space, and it's going to be all about sort of human and human linkages to outer space. Should come up in mid of 2025, knock on wood. Um, uh, but one of the consultations and one of the things that the Open University does is tries to arrange materials that go next to or in the same time with sort of these programs. And one of the things we discussed was how can we present the linkages between space and humanity. And this is one of the photos that I happened to sort of surprisingly discover while looking for those linkages. And this is so just a bit of a context for the photo that you're looking on the right side. It's basically a picture of one astronaut, Charlie Duke, and his family. And during his mission on Apollo 16, he left this on the sort of the surface on the moon. So one of the things that sort of made me this think about this is because there's parallel to this, I also have two PhD students who are doing space law, and one of the things that they kept telling me that there is about, at least when it comes to the moon, there's at least about 200,000 kilograms or about 200 tons of detritus, stuff that we left on the moon from previous missions. And given this surprising photograph that I found on sort of the surface on the moon, I would hesitate to call all of it space junk, as they would say it, because there has to be something. There has to be sort of a spectrum or a difference between what we left casually on the moon, discarded on the moon, because it's part of missions, and something that is more meaningful and more connected sort of to humanity and to sort of to our connection with both space and celestial bodies. So let me to the question: what is actually heritage, and what is space junk? And being the international lawyer that I am, immediately what it came to mind was, well, we do have Heritage Convention, right? So we have the UNESCO Heritage Convention. Let's look up at what UNESCO actually defines heritage. The quote there is from the About page from UNESCO, and I really liked it. It's all about the whole point of heritage, which is our legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we pass on to future generations. So the general idea of heritage is that it's connect to our past, but it's also kind of a window to our future. And if something epitomizes space, and sort of space heritage is exactly that. It's a promise of some type of future for future generations, but it's also a linkages to our past, both Cold War, both our our imaginations of the moon and other celestial bodies, imagination of the stars, etc., etc. But the UNESCO Heritage Convention, which is from 1972, if I remember correctly, um, actually doesn't just talk about culture or cultural heritage. It actually puts in it a natural heritage. So for cultural heritage, it thinks about monuments, groups of buildings, and sites, and these are all somehow connected to art, archaeology, or sort of art history, architecture, etc. So the picture on the right is a photograph I took way back when I was living in Budapest for a little bit, and it's the picture of the chain bridge and the Buddha castle in the background. But to contextualize the Danube, the bank of the Danube, including these monuments like the Chain Bridge, the Parliament, and the Buddha Castle, and the buildings around there are part of the UNESCO World Heritage List because of its unique architecture, splendid views. So those are protected and they're listed buildings. So this is one of the examples of the things that UNESCO would protect. So this would fall into groups of buildings um, that have sort of unique and universal value. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, but what is actually also important is that UNESCO deals with or protects also natural features. So natural so-called natural heritage. So natural features consisting of physical and biological formations that can be important from an aesthetic or scientific point of view, geological or physiographical formations, right? Those are again important from a certain point of view of science or conservation or uh, uh, biology, biodiversity, etc. And natural sites with with conservation for natural beauty or they're important for science. This is important because there are different sort of interests that are kind of intersect when it comes to space heritage or sort of space conservation, if you want to put it from a different point of view. Um, Problem, the first, which is that the international heritage sort of legal framework doesn't really protect space heritage or anything to do with outer space, mostly because the general idea of heritage protection is that states uh, uh, that have sort of territorial jurisdiction over those sites of heritage, that they are the ones who are primarily tasked with protecting them. So the general idea of the International Heritage Convention is that states have these wonderful are sort of stewards of these wonderful heritage sites. That they should be obliged to protect them, and one of the ways to do it is to have this sort of list of heritage protection. Unfortunately, it only applies to a state's territory, and it only applies to sort of areas under their jurisdiction. Areas that are outside of their jurisdiction, especially areas that are outside of any state's jurisdiction, so these will be the global commons, so-called, or their ABNJs, Area Beyond National Jurisdiction. Um, they don't fall under UNESCO's remit. UNESCO has sort of acknowledged this and it has tried to come to grips with underwater heritage, so heritage that is in basically in the world's oceans, and it does have a convention underwater heritage, but of course nothing like sort of nothing like for outer space. The picture you're seeing on the right side is sort of an artifact left by Apollo 15 on the 2nd of August 1971. The figure was left by one of the Apollo 15 astronauts, and it's supposed to represent sculpture. It's supposed to represent so it's a miniature sculpture, and it's supposed to represent the fallen astronauts and cosmonauts. The plaque in the background is the names of the 14 astronauts and cosmonauts that have lost their lives or have just they have lost their lives sort of in those countries' pursuits of outer space. Um, so the there's an interesting background story that the original intention of the author of the author of the sculpture was to represent all of humanity, not just the astronauts, but sort of the astronauts put it there, and NASA found in their mind better uses. Um, so while the UNESCO heritage sort of protection regime doesn't really have anything to offer outer space in terms of ready-made regime for protection, there are ways that people um, uh, have been trying to actually discuss and talk about protection of space heritage. So there's a talk about new convention. There's always a talk about that we should have a new convention. Unfortunately, there really isn't an appetite in space law or in space politics, space governance for new hardline treaties. So the most that we can hope for is some sort of um, uh, a general governance regime that goes through the memorandums of understanding that are being discussed at the moment. For example, the Artemis Accords, or something similar that's going on with China, Russia, Iran, and those sort of permanent the regime going for permanent settlement of the moon by those three sort of countries. But one of the things that we can look at is for inspiration in the UNESCO heritage regime about what are the things that we should try to protect. Because as I said, the moon alone has about 200,000 kilograms, 200 tons of detritus. Some of it is pardon my French, the poo that the astronauts visiting the moon left on the moon because they needed to make their spacecraft lighter. Some of it is crashed, broken landers. There's an Israeli crashed spacecraft on the moon that also took biological material that is tardigrades. So those are if you know, those are water bears, and basically they are the most resilient microorganism on Earth, or one of the most resilient microorganisms on Earth that can survive mostly anywhere. So that's a big sort of an issue. But all of those, so those can be in the various gradations of sort of space junk. Um, but but the idea is what part of that space junk we actually try to title as heritage. And also we need to remember one key aspects of the UNESCO heritage regime, which is the natural part, right? And then I'll go later to discussing that when it comes to um, areas of scientific interest and areas of sort of scientific conservation because of special interest to, let's say, astronomers or people searching for life. So, is there anything that we can get any inspiration that we can glean from the UNESCO regime, right? And there are at least two helpful components, and that is the fact that what UNESCO tries to protect, both tangible and intangible cultural heritage, but also natural heritage, which is that it tries to protect those things that are of outstanding universal value from the point of view of history, art, and science is for cultural heritage, or outstanding universal value from the aesthetic or scientific point of view, or from the point of view of conservation, or from the point of view of natural beauty, right? So the important bits that we kind of see from here is that um, uh, is the idea that the things that we protect, yes, they have to be tied to human beings in the sense that human beings have to find them aesthetically pleasing, have to find them as sort of an sort of parts of a natural beauty, but they also have to have some universal value in the sense that it speaks to humanity as a whole, not just that specific culture, that specific you know specifically locally culturally relevant, but it has some sort of universal value. And UNESCO has tried to define this, and if you look at the UNESCO sort of list of heritage sites, you'll see that they've defined it quite broadly. But for them, outstanding universal value means cultural and/or natural significance, which is so exceptional as to transcend national boundaries and to be of common importance for the present and future generations of all humanity. As such, the permanent protection of this heritage is of the highest importance to the international community as a whole. So the general idea is that not everything can be, but given the things that go on the UNESCO World Heritage List, there's a lot that can be, right? And so these criteria have been identified, especially in the UNESCO operational guidance guidelines, which give further idea of what sort of the outstanding universal value means. So this is something that also can be interrogated and see how they fit within the concept of sort of cultural heritage. Now I've talked a lot in here about sort of cultural heritage, and the talk is more about heritage in general, right? So cultural heritage. This picture, for instance, is from the original Apollo 11 lander. I think this the picture, the person in the photograph is Buzz Aldrin, but I'm not sure. Um, and it's sort of uh, and it's sort of the one of the more iconic pictures of sort of the Apollo era. The top white part would have been the one that kind of launched and returned astronauts to the spacecraft that orbited the moon at that time. Okay, 2 minutes, excellent. So I'll cut that explanation short. But the general idea is that it's not only when we talk about heritage, it's not only that this space debris or space junk it needs to be protected. It's also areas of natural beauty. So astronomers, for example, would really like to protect certain parts of the moon because they're in permanent darkness or because they're on the other side of the Earth. So they're in the shadow. So they're in the shadow of the moon, and therefore they're not polluted by electromagnetic signals or light pollution, right? And they would be really like those because they could really use them to glimpse further and further away back into the history of the universe, right? So when we talk about these first, one of the sort of the trickier. The picture of this is from a mock-up for the Open University of the Rosetta mission lander, which was the first mission to rendezvous with the comet, orbit a comet, and deliver a lander to the comet. So it's a lot of first, but is it sort of important enough to become a cultural heritage? Um, it's a multilateral mission, right? So do we treat it as one of the things that I'm looking at is do we treat it as detritus, as junk left over, or is there something special about it? And this is where I will leave you off. Thank you very much. I'm just going to show the slide for credits for the pictures there, and please ask me questions later.